There is a consideration, a question, an issue that I think helps to very strongly place a person in what I call the multidimensional space of political philosophies that we all inhabit. We're all, I think, at different points in that space. I don't think any two American citizens are identical in terms of their political philosophies. The consideration I'm referring to is an individual's view of the relationship between adherence to rule of law on the one hand and the achievement of desired legislative outcomes on the other hand. And when I say rule of law, the law to which I'm referring is the United States Constitution, the highest law in the land. Let me illustrate this with an example. There are Americans who can make a plausible case for the doing away with local control of law enforcement, doing away with local police departments, local sheriff's departments, and replacing them with federal law enforcement. The creation of a federal department of domestic policing. I can imagine some arguments that might be made in favor of that. Uniformity of training, uniformity of rules, strong oversight at the federal level. I don't know. I'm not arguing for or against here. I have my own feeling about it, but that's not the issue here. This illustrates the fact that there are people who would like a particular legislative outcome, legislation doing away with local police, establishing federal policing, but that is in conflict with rule of constitutional law. That would be absolutely outside the Constitution. It would be egregiously unconstitutional. So people who are interested in some legislative outcome that is not within the rule of constitutional law tend to take two approaches to dealing with that. One, the one I actually respect, I don't agree with it, but I at least respect its honesty, is that taken by Judge, I think it's Richard Posner. I've written and talked about him in other posts. He is a judge who sits, he's a federal judge on, I think, the 7th District Court of Appeals, a highly regarded jurist, regarded as one of the great, well, regarded in legal academia, in law schools, as one of the great legal minds today. He's the most often cited judge of the 20th century, and he's still alive. He's very explicit and honest about it. He says the answer is wad up the Constitution and throw it in the garbage can. Just eliminate the Constitution. He says it's an outdated document that we shouldn't be using. That's a very honest approach. That would then give the federal government the power to do anything it wanted to do without being constrained by any law. That concept is growing in popularity, I think, because an article I read had a quote from a law professor at a very prestigious law school praising Judge Posner, calling him perhaps the greatest legal mind alive today. And that, and what I generally think I know about contemporary academia, leads me to believe that that idea, just do away with the Constitution, is gaining popularity in law schools and legal intellectual circles, that is what students are being taught in law schools, and that will probably be a trend, a growing trend among the judiciary, because the young people in law schools today are tomorrow's judges. Right now, however, that's such an extreme view, it would not enjoy widespread acceptance in the general citizenry. Therefore, a different approach is being used now in government by Congress and other elected federal officials, and it is this. It's an unwillingness to be honest and to say, to hell with the Constitution, we just want power. They don't want to say that openly and honestly. So instead, they say, well, we're adhering to the Constitution when we, for example, make a small quantity, possession of a small quantity of marijuana, a federal crime punishable by a year in prison. That's absolutely unconstitutional. There's nothing in the Constitution that would justify that. It's criminal. But they justify it by saying, oh, no, no, no. It's the Interstate Commerce Clause. Yeah, it gives us that authority. Well, no, it doesn't. But the criminals in Congress and the other elected federal criminals currently running our government make those outlandish assertions, and I'm afraid that the general population, the general citizenry, is insufficiently conversant with the Constitution to recognize that that's just pure hogwash. They hear it from these powerful, seemingly authoritative officials, and they go, well, I guess the Interstate Commerce Clause justifies it, when in fact it doesn't. And then there are other people, a lot of the American citizenry, and no federal politicians that I know of, who actually genuinely believe in rule of law, that we have the Constitution, it's the highest law in the land, and we have to adhere to it. What I want to point out here is there doesn't have to be conflict here. People who, for example, might want to do away with locally controlled law enforcement and make it all federal, they can do that legally under rule of law, because the Constitution is an entirely flexible document. And by flexible, I don't mean that it can just be interpreted willy-nilly any way you want to. I mean that it can be legally modified through the amendment process in an orderly, legal, legitimate manner. And if people want to enact something legislative that is currently unconstitutional, the way to do it under rule of law is not to simply enact it illegally, but rather to modify the Constitution in a legal, orderly manner as described by Article 5, the article that describes the amendment process. Now, the problem that presents for people who, again, might want to make all policing federal, or who want to make it a federal crime to possess a small amount of marijuana, the problem it presents for them is that it requires democracy. It requires that the citizens being controlled by the government actually consent to it in a significant majority. The amendment process requires that actually 3/4 of the states approve of or ratify an amendment. And that's a fairly high bar, and I think it's an appropriate bar. It means that if we want to change the rules, the structure of our government, and the rules by which it operates, there has to be really pretty broad consensus, which means it really has to be a pretty good change. It can't be a change that just a small segment of people would favor, such as making possession of a small amount of marijuana a federal crime. I don't think most Americans support that. I think most Americans don't know about it. Or doing away with local control of policing and replacing it with federal control. I don't think you could get that amendment passed. So the tyrannical, dictatorial people, the criminals in Congress and other elected federal officials and their academic, intellectual lackeys who like to hang on to their coattails and go to the fancy parties and all of that, who have these, radical ideologies, they don't like the fact that what they want to do is not what most Americans want to do. So while they tout democracy out of their mouths, they don't subscribe to it. They don't want the people of the United States to be self-governing. They want to be an oligarchical tyranny, which is what we currently have. Okay, this video's gotten really long. I'll stop here, but I hope you'll think about some of these ideas, and I will elaborate on them further. Thank you, as usual, for your patience in watching these videos, listening to me. Weather report from Bell Buckle, Tennessee. It is a most glorious day. There's just a very slight breeze. It's sunny. It's not too hot, not too humid. It's a beautiful day, and thank you very much. We're going to overthrow this bad government and replace it with what we are supposed to have: genuine representative citizen self-governance under rule of law, and it will be law that we, the collective citizenry of the nation, in a collaborative manner, the law that we continuously develop and modify as per our desires for the benefit of the children and grandchildren and future generations of this great nation. All right. Thank you.